Waking up at 5 a.m. isn't always easy, but for a wonder of the world, it's something that simply has to be done. Today we embark on a trek through Chichen Itza, a stunning example of Mayan culture and an architectural wonder of the world. I've always been fascinated with the stories of the Maya, a civilization that built a great empire and then, for some reason, simply walked away from it a few hundred years before the Spanish arrived. Chichen Itza is a place that millions of tourists flock to every year, an international wonder of the world, a place that you simply have to visit. But more importantly, Chichen Itza is at the center of this Mayan mystery. Who were these people, and why did they bail on such an epic civilization of such grandiose proportions? Let's find out.
Here we are, guys. We made it inside. To get into Chichen Itza, it is approximately 500 pesos, which is about $25. That is almost double the price it used to cost in 2018 for many of the blogs I was reading online, which I would say is quite an increase, but at least it's open during the coronavirus times, and they've done a good job to kind of at least preserve it, and there's a lot less people than are normally here. It says that there's upwards of 3,000 to 8,000 people visit Chichen Itza every day, with like a high of 10,000 or 11,000 recorded at one time. That's a lot of people. That being said, I'm up early, I'm out here, and there's people. It's not that full though, which is definitely nice. So let's learn about Chichen Itza. What's going on here? The story of Chichen Itza starts about 1,400 years ago, a little bit more. They said that this is really the classical era of the Mayans, starting from 600 AD and kind of towards the fall of the Mayans around, I say 1200. I don't know. Chichen Itza was abandoned well before the Spanish arrived. At least people weren't really living here and using it as a functional place. The name Chichen Itza is said that Itza was basically a familial name, and Chichen kind of denotes chi, the mouth, and chen would be these chenes, the cenotes, these kind of underwater pools that they used for agricultural purposes, as well as, you know, the ability to sustain a city. So that's what the name stands for. The original Mayan name, they're unsure. There's a lot of debate about it. They've picked some of these names you can see on the bottom here, but there's a lot of debate whether those were the actual names or if that name was changed over time. Unfortunately, a lot about what we know about the Mayans, some of it's just lost to history, so there's a lot of guesswork. So this is what the name that's currently used is, and the Spanish interpretation of the Mayan words Chichen Itza is what we use today. When people think about Chichen Itza, the UNESCO heritage site, or whatever they imagine in their mind, this is what they're thinking of. This is called El Castillo, the castle. It's an absolutely stunning Mayan era pyramid that's at the center of Chichen Itza. Although Chichen Itza is, however, an entire complex of buildings. It was a city, a governorate. There's lots of different things that have gone on here, and upwards of 20 to 40,000 people used to live here in the antiquity times. So there's a lot more than just a simple pyramid. There's a lot of speculation about what everything was used for here, but this temple, El Castillo, better known as the Temple of Kukulkan, was used as a ceremonial spot, and also was built by the founders of the kind of this Mayan area to be a centerpiece for their city. So the reason it's called Kukulkan, that is the Mayan god that's very similar to Quetzalcoatl, which is this kind of serpent bird god that was very important within the mythology of the Mayans. The coolest part, or one of the very cool and interesting parts about this temple, is that when you clap, the echoes of your clap reverberate off of the temple stairs and make the sound of a quetzal bird, which is an endemic bird that obviously is the namesake for the god. The Mayans, along with other indigenous tribes, were seemingly masters of construction regarding the equinox and times of the year. So there's while they were excavating this site, there was various moments where the excavators, the archaeologists, found a lot of links to astrology, to astronomy, to connections with direction and how the buildings were built, how the light would play off the pyramids. It's incredibly interesting, and it's something that you have to imagine without any sort of modern technology they were doing. One interesting thing I found while I was reading is the talk of how Mayan lineage and Mayan rule used to work during this classical period between 600 AD and let's call it 1100. The Mayans ruled their land through lineages, much like having a chieftain or a ruler or a king, whatever you want to call it. But the interesting thing they found here about Chichen Itza is that there's good evidence for there being a ruling council that ruled over this land, a council of 8 kind of elite families that were in charge of the entire Yucatan Peninsula, as opposed to this typical ruler style that they definitely had at Uxmal and other parts of the area, over other areas of Mayan dominance. You can think of this as an old school oligarchy, not a democracy at all, but evidence that there were families sharing the wealth of the area, which was incredibly important and very, very different than what was going on in the rest of the world, to be honest. As we make our way to the sacred cenote, the underground watering hole, which is the namesake of Chichen Itza, I will comment about something because I'm trying to give you guys real travel advice, and these are the real tales from the road. I think what the Mexican government has done here with regards to Chichen Itza is a bit of a shame. It's a beautiful place, you pay a lot to get in, and they've essentially let basically vendors set up stands selling tchotchkes and knickknacks and stuff everywhere. There's also an overload of guides, so while you're touring one of the wonders of the world, you have people pestering you, trying to sell you junk. I have no issue with people trying to make a living, people trying to make money, people, you know, the tourist economy here is super important. I'm not complaining about that. I just think it really devalues the site. And for example, in Uxmal, it was, you go to Uxmal, you go in, there's the temple, it's beautiful, it's quiet, it's kind of preserved in a way that's really authentic. And here, you know, you get to see the, you know, the Culiacan temple. It's beautiful, it's epic. But then you have stuff like this everywhere you go. And I just don't think it's right. I don't think it's a way to pay homage to the amazing architecture that has been made during the Mayan period. I don't think it's a good way to preserve your history. It's just a one opinion of one guy. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. So this is the sacred cenote. You can see it's basically a circular cave that's sunken into a well. Cenote also can mean well in Spanish. And then there's always a bunch of trees around it because it's obviously very fertile because of the water. The Mayans, these were incredibly important for the Mayans because this was a source of fresh water that was easily accessible, always clean, and they're also connected sometimes to underwater rivers. So it's a safe source of drinking water, of water to use for irrigation, and for just water for society in general. So what you can find in typical Mayan cities is they're all located near cenotes or near rivers. That's how people used to build cities, had to be connected to a water source. So these were the water sources for the Mayans. That's why Uxmal is so important, and that's why the god Chak is also so important, if you can remember from that episode, the god of rain, because for those that were not connected to cenotes, they were much more dependent on the temperate climate of the Yucatan Peninsula to make sure that they were able to function, to eat, to be comfortable. But the cenotes are like the, you know, it's like the mother of society. They nourish and kept people alive. An interesting side note about the Spanish conquest of the Yucatan. So the Spanish conquest of the Yucatan was started in the early 1500s when the Spanish started, you know, going through the Aztec lands, through the Zapotec lands, and then down into the Yucatan Peninsula. The mission was given to a guy named Montejo, who actually, there's a big street in Merida called Paseo de Montejo. essentially it was really hard to capture the Yucatan Peninsula. For whatever reason, they couldn't hold on to the cities. The Mayans kept overthrowing them and kept taking the land back. And so through a series of 10 years, 15 years, they kind of captured, failed, abandoned the land. Very interesting. It actually took so long that Montejo Sr., the guy that was originally sent there, he ended up getting too old and dying, and his son, Montejo Jr., had to come back and recapture the land. The Spanish finally took over this area, and they named Chichen Itza, they called it Ciudad Real, so the royal city. And since then, it was kind of, you know, put into the Spanish Empire. But they realized that it was a really important place for the Mayans, and they remained it, or they kept it open as a point of pilgrimage, as the sacred cenote is a very, very important place for Mayan religious practices and the history, especially the oral traditions of the Maya. You can see here the really intricate carvings of the Mayan warriors holding the severed head of someone that he killed in battle. You can see the eagle, which is one of the, you know, the most important symbols in Mexico. You can see here the serpent, and then all of these on the side here, they had the heads of jaguars. You can see there, you can see there. The jaguar was an incredibly important animal for indigenous, let's just call them Mexican tribes, Mayans, Aztecs, Olmecs. The Aztecs even called their warriors jaguar warriors because it was seen as an animal that was prideful, fierce, and you know, really, really just powerful. I'm not even going to try and pronounce this Mayan word, but this is what they're calling the skull wall. So here you can see the importance of the symbology of the skull, as life here was very balanced with the gods, with religion, and especially with sacrificial practices. The Mexican connection to skulls, we know sugar skulls and skulls from Dia de los Muertos. This kind of weird obsession with death goes back not to the Spanish times, but to the indigenous times, to the Aztecs, who built massive skull walls in Teotihuacan, and here to the Aztecs, to the Mayans, who were doing very, very similar things. We're now in the probably best preserved, epic ball game, let's call it a field, for that really traditional indigenous ball game, which I've explained in the Uxmal episode. Here behind me is a place where they would do ritual ceremonies before each game, or famous families would sit up here to spectate. And then here you have this ball pit, which we're going to go investigate more. One of the best and coolest remaining things, and one of the most hardcore depictions of anything that you'll find here in Chichen Itza, are these along the sides of the great ball court. They did these depictions of warriors who were playing the ball game, and typically in the hand here, you can't see it here because it's not super clear, but they're holding a decapitated head with a snake coming out of this, basically the blood trail. This was a game of warriors. This was a game of captured slaves. This was a game of redemption, and people were sacrificed during, before, and after the event. The word blood sport comes to mind, very much like the gladiator times. And here you have a really excellent view of the main temple. And this was just a part of their reality for the Mayans and their society. This was not well, it was a fun game. It was life or death many times. Another interesting thing to note about this site is that there's several zones. So there's the North Zone, South Zone, Central Zone. We're in the Central Zone here, and here you can see the buildings stylistically are quite different. Not quite, but they're different than the ones we find in other zones, which gives evidence that there were many different peoples calling this home over a series of 500-600 years. And the styles were imported from different regions of the Yucatan, and even as far west as where the Olmecs, or probably the early Aztecs, were settling their lands. So here we have a depiction of chalk like we saw at Uxmal, but the style is quite different and quite more ornate than the more classical styles of the of the central large El Castillo and the ball pit. We didn't see any of these jutting sort of architectural fixtures, as well as these very ornate square shapes and carvings. There are carvings on the other side, they're just different, and I think that's the point. The last fact I'll leave you with is, during my reading, you could actually climb on the temple, you could climb on the various things, up until the year 2006, where some lady from San Francisco was on the top and fell off and died. So they had to close it down. That's a pretty sad fact. That's pretty intense. But you know, she kind of ruined it for everyone else, but it's actually honestly for the best now that they have so many tourists here that we shouldn't be climbing on stuff like this. This is kind of what I like about traveling in countries with less regulations, but also it kind of ruins it over time. So in this case, probably for the best, I'll say on that. Now it's time for my hot take on Chichen Itza. It's a wonder of the world. UNESCO said it was a wonder of the world in 1980 something. You have to come here if you come to Mexico. It's one of those things you need to see with your eyes. It's incredibly impressive. It's really beautiful. It's a place to come. That being said, it is much too touristy for me. I don't mind going to touristy places within reason, but what they've done here with so many vendors, so many tour guides, and so many foreigners who, you know, I just saw some foreigners just on their phone, not even looking at the temple. Yeah, it's just not my thing. I think it's a great place. I mean, how can you argue with that? But it's a place that I think is only getting worse over time. And I have, as a person who started a travel company and a person who takes travel and sustainable travel very seriously, I worry for places like this. I worry that they're becoming inauthentic. I worry that the experiences that you can have and the quality of an experience you can have at places like this are becoming not unsustainable, but just like less possible over time. That's my worry for Chichen Itza, just like it was when I went to the Colosseum or other wonders of the world. These are incredible buildings. They need to be preserved and they need to be visited. They deserve to be visited.
So guys, that was Chichen Itza. I'm so happy to have shared this amazing location with you. If you liked the video, of course, make sure to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. That really helps me out, helps the algorithm out. Sorry I didn't have my finishing video, but it got lost to history, just like the Mayan civilization. Hope you guys enjoy the next video, one more from Mexico, and then we are on to Albania. Hasta luego.